martini glass, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way podcast. I'm Laura. As always, this is
Kate.
the birthday girl because as we're recording this, it's someone's birthday in 2 short days. So happy birthday.
Thank you. In celebration, I've obviously channeled 16-year-old Rory,
Mm-hmm.
but also 21-year-old Rory.
Let's give these a shot, shall we?
Yeah, I have made Rory's. Let's see if they do in fact taste like a My Little Pony.
They do indeed. Yep.
Yeah.
That's
but like in a good way.
Yeah.
I can see why Luke maybe wouldn't like it, but
these are actually delicious.
Yeah. I just eyeballed the recipe. So in here there's vodka, grenadine, pineapple juice, and topped with a little champagne.
Spectacular and very fitting.
I have foregone the maraschino cherries though, because unlike the Gilmore Girls, I actually hate maraschino cherries.
I'm also fine with that.
Yeah.
But again, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be discussing motherhood and its representations on the show.
Yes, indeed. I think we're going to cover sort of like a higher level discussion of motherhood. There are so many subtopics that we could get into the weeds on, but we have some separate episodes planned for the future that go into a little more detail about those. So for today, we're just going to kind of talk about, the role that motherhood plays in the show and some of the different depictions that we get, the variety of depictions that we get, and just kind of the impact that it has on the characters and the audience as a whole.
Mm-hmm. As we get started, just always do those YouTube things for us. It's one click, real fast. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, stay up to date on our content so you can keep getting info on our drops. But let's just dive right into our recaps. We're going to kick it off this week with the third Lorelai. And in this episode, we see Richard's mother, Lorelai Trix Gilmore, returning to Hartford from London and driving Emily nuts. Trix finds out about the arrangement to pay for Chilton and offers to change the terms of Rory's trust fund to allow her to access it immediately in order to remove the need for them to borrow money from Emily and Richard. But Emily worries that this will change her relationship with the girls. Rory misses out on most of this because of a school project. She encourages Tristan to ask out Paris, and they go on a date, but when he says he just wants to be friends and implies that it was Rory's suggestion to go out, Paris loses it and her tenuous friendship with Rory is torpedoed.
Right. Then we have Emily in Wonderland. Rory invites Emily to go antiquing in Stars Hollow and enjoy a day together. She takes her to the Independence Inn and shows her the potting shed where she lived with Lorelai in their first years in Stars Hollow, which impacts Emily deeply. She goes home and decorates a room just for Rory and confronts Lorelai about her hating them so much that she would take the child away to live in a shack.
Not the best parenting moment and not the best motherhood moment, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
I think
there are a lot of mothering moments in this because we meet Richard's mother. We have the dynamics between Trix and Emily, Trix and Lorelai, Emily and Lorelai, Lorelai and Rory. Just so much.
And there's probably dozens beyond that we haven't even mentioned. But I think a good place that we should start with this week is just identifying some of the types of mothers and those relationships that we see on the show.
Right. This show really runs the gamut. I mean, you can do a lot in 7 seasons plus a revival.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously the core relationship, which we've had an entire episode on, if you want to go back and check that out, on sort of like the best friendship between Lorelai and Rory, and how that's a very new, very modern type of motherhood that Emily's conservative role model motherhood just doesn't seem to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So that really anchors the show. And then we also have, the strict, controlling, conservative mom in Emily, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And we also see that relationship is estranged. So that's sort of like mother-daughter who can't see eye to eye and who barely talk.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the very close relationships and the very distant relationships.
Mm-hmm. We also get the religious moms.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly Mrs. Kim, but obviously I would imagine, and you can, I think, safely assume that Lorelai was definitely raised in a waspy household. She didn't exert, Emily and Richard didn't exert that much religious control over Lorelai as Mrs. Kim did over Lane, but that's another example. We also get the single mothers.
Yeah, Lorelai is obviously a single mom. Anna is a single mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are others. And,
Liz at first.
Liz, yeah. I mean, I guess Jimmy kind of ran out on her pretty early,
Mhm.
leaving. She can't have been much older than 18 or 19 when she had Jess, if you kind of do the math on how old she might have been when she had Jess. So single moms.
Yeah.
But then we also have traditional moms,
Mhm.
Barbara Forrester and Teresa Lister come to mind. So Dean and Lindsay's parents were very much that sort of like nuclear family, mom and dad.
Mhm.
Um,
I think we should also just mention grandmothers.
yeah, grandmothers often step in
Mhm.
to act in a motherly role, whether that's a good idea or not.
Most of the time, probably not. Well, at least on this show, it doesn't
Yeah.
always seem to work out well.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that grandmothers can't like raise a child well.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, that grandmother was Emily,
Mm-hmm.
who just kind of continued to do the same things with Rory that she did with Lorelai without even realizing that maybe it was her strategy in parenting that was the problem instead of her daughter being the issue at every turn.
Just way too helicoptery.
Yeah. Yeah. Helicopter grandparenting. You called it the other night, and I thought that was brilliant. So
Thank you.
Yes. That was a good one. And then we also have, the offbeat but loving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Suki comes to mind.
Yep.
Like she's kind of traditional, but not totally. But seems loving at every turn and kind of lets her kids be who they are from what we can tell. I mean, we don't get to see a ton of them growing up.
Yep.
But
no, but I would call Suki a great mother.
Yeah,
within the context of the show. She was very present and there in her child's life, which is not always what we get because sometimes there are neglectful and teen parents, which are not mutually inclusive or exclusive, but just another example.
Yeah, neglectful moms are certainly an interesting topic and will probably get a lot deeper treatment from us later. But, Liz, she was probably physically there for a lot of Jess's childhood, but wasn't really emotionally there for him and wasn't providing him the kind of guidance and structure that he needed to succeed because he's clearly a bright kid. And if you just had a bit of a different upbringing, he might have gone a very different way.
Yeah.
And then we also get like Paris's mom, who's hardly around. And when she is around, she's just extremely critical.
Mm-hmm.
A little more traditional, but also neglectful. So like some of these categories overlap.
Yeah. Seems like Tristan probably had a lot of that going on too.
Yeah. We know nothing really about his mom. We know his dad is kind of that way.
Yeah.
But
then we also get surrogate mothers.
Right? We have Mia, who kind of takes Lorelai under her wing and acts in a nurturing role for her after she leaves her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have like the direct surrogacy links in the revival, with that being Paris's entire business, and the idea of Luke and Lorelai trying to have a child by a surrogate.
Yeah, I think also like just Stars Hollow as a mother figure for Lorelai and Rory. I think the town was also just mothering and raising them, both of them. So,
and not even just the women in town. There's definitely a feminine energy, but the men are also kind of equally a part of that. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then we have, the stay-at-home mom versus the working mom topic. Lorelai is a career woman who's pursuing higher education. But then we also have, I guess Lindsay is not even a mom yet, but she's kind of like prepping to be a stay-at-home mom. And then we get Emily, who never worked outside the home except maybe in volunteer work, but also wasn't a very present mother.
No.
Despite that.
No, she could also easily and should, I think, fall under the neglectful category, as should Paris's mom, because you didn't really raise your kids. You either had like maids or nannies who were doing it, and that's not cool.
Yeah. And then we have stepmothers as well. We don't get to see a ton of Sherry being that for Rory, but, she does use that terminology at least once. Like, oh, my stepmother.
Yeah. I'm actually glad because Sherry was not a good mom. So she would probably be just an equally bad stepmom, but I'm fine with getting less of her, and I'm not okay with what she did with abandoning Gigi, which we'll talk about, but
yeah. So that kind of like covers most of the gamut. I mean, if you can come up with any others that we've missed, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. On the whole, how do you think that this show portrays motherhood?
I think it portrays it as a goal. I think it portrays it in such a favorable light that it insinuates that motherhood is some kind of ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this day and age, we're having a lot more conversations about being child free by choice. Whereas there was so much romanticization of motherhood, even through struggle in the show,
Mm-hmm.
that it sort of paints it in a very positive light. Like everyone does this, right? And I find that interesting because the show actually sort of came about because the WB was able to get grants from like the Family Friendly
Mm-hmm.
Planning Council. I can't remember the full name of it, but you know, it was pitched as family friendly TV.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because, you know, normally a story of a teen parent who decided to keep the child would be maybe not so family friendly, because actually we were just watching One's Got Class and the Other One
Yep.
Dies, where the kids in the class that Lorelai is talking to are sort of browbeating her about her teen pregnancy and how all of that went down. And the other mothers are extremely like
Contemptuous is good,
contemptuous
because they don't want her talking about it, because they
Yeah.
think that it's encouraging teenage pregnancy.
Right. They're very judgmental about it, and they give her a lot of grief for just trying to answer these kids' questions honestly, but also trying to like sidestep it and move on, but it not
Mhm.
really working. And yeah, so like the show came out of the idea that it would be family friendly. And so I guess the the underlying current of that is that it wouldn't have been so friendly if she had, let's say, gone another route where she didn't have Rory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably why they allowed it.
Yeah, I think so. Because it still sort of portrayed parenthood as an ideal and as like the only option, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was overwhelmingly positive. But even within that, there was some nuance.
Yeah.
And there were some bad mothers who were maybe like held up as examples.
Yeah. Motherhood is definitely, not even within the context of the show, but just in life in general, like motherhood is a choice.
Mhm.
Like, it's not something that should ever be forced on anybody. And if you yourself don't want to be a mother, or don't find yourself in a position where you feel like that's a role that you want to fulfill, you shouldn't. And I really like how the show highlights that for us. I think, especially with Sherry,
Mm.
we see that most, I think, with her, where this woman was not meant to be a mother. She neglects her daughter from an early age, and then ends up abandoning her when she's only 4, and just takes off for Paris for a job. So I like that the show touches on some of those heavier mothering moments too, where they're not sugarcoating what it's like. They'll make it very clear that it is hard, it's time consuming, it's a financial responsibility, and a not like it's its own financial burden, but it doesn't gloss over the aspects of motherhood that make it difficult.
Well, sometimes it does. I think part of the issue is I can only imagine that Lorelai's early years raising Rory were extremely difficult and were just full of struggle and hurdles. But we start at a place where Rory's more grown up. She's taking care of herself quite a bit. Lorelai is very focused on her job and is able to do that because her daughter is so self-sufficient. And they sort of treat the past as romantic and idyllic. Like, you know, even when Rory is showing Emily the potting shed, she's like, this is where we used to live. And mom made it really pretty. And she put a curtain here. And, you know, there's little flowers on the wallpaper. Like, can you imagine living in a shed? It doesn't look like it had any insulation or any creature comforts that would make raising a child even remotely comfortable, nonetheless, like easy. So they do, I think, maybe make it look a little too easy that Lorelai was able to single-handedly bring up Rory and work full time and save enough for a down payment on a nice house. And, you know, they start us off in a place in their lives where things have gone quite on the upturn for them. And they look back on their past as idyllic. That's the only word I can think of that really encapsulates how they view it. And therefore that impacts how we view it when, like, imagine growing up like that.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, and, you know, thankfully you and I were both privileged enough to not have to, but that is a reality for a lot of children that have
Yeah.
to grow up in a situation like that, where they're not given even like a bed or a proper living space, or let alone not even having a mother or parental figures in their life at all. So I think you make an excellent point there that yes, it did gloss over some of it, but I do like how sometimes it did also allude to the fact that it is very difficult to be a mom.
Yeah, it's true. They do handle some of the more difficult topics, like parents who abandon their children and parents who are addicts who kind of put their child rearing responsibilities onto family members.
Yep.
And that makes me think of Liz, obviously, with Jess, and how he was hell on wheels and she couldn't do anything with him, but she also was probably high or drunk a lot of that time, and it might have been a lot easier if that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
But it's the reality again for a lot of people. And if you haven't watched Scott Patterson's, or listened, I suppose, to Scott Patterson's podcast, I Am All In, he talks about this because he's had experiences with this in his own life, and he knows how difficult it is to deal with addicts. And so again, they sort of gloss over how hard it is to have a mom like Liz or a sister like Liz, and they make her into this kooky, lovable side character who just comes in and causes a stir, while making her seem less bad than she is. People like her are unreliable, inconsistent, and they take from people around them and just kind of expect people to fix their problems for them. And that's not a healthy environment for a child to grow up in, because then there's absolutely no stability or security for them. And so, when you put it in that frame, it really puts Jess into context a little more. But
yeah. I'm surprised he wasn't a worse kid than we end up seeing, or what we end up getting from him. Like, he definitely didn't stay on the tracks that Luke wanted him to, and that I think Liz was hoping that he would have. But that's, she predominantly has a part to play there. But he could have been a lot worse of a teenager and been in a lot more trouble than what we see. So I'll have to give credit for Liz for sending him to live with Luke, just recognizing that, even though, Jess is almost fully grown at this point and he's 17, I think it was a good move on her part to send him to go live with Luke, hoping that, having some sort of parental figure in his life, even if it's not a mother, will just allow him to flourish somewhat and improve. And I think it's just good on her for recognizing that she was not fully failing as a mother, but not being successful either.
She was ill-equipped.
Yeah.
Again, she's a young mother who, we don't get a perfect timeline on their parents, but I don't think the grandparents are around to help at all. And, she moves away to New York, so Luke's not even necessarily super close by. Jimmy abandons her. She goes through a string of boyfriends and husbands who are also unreliable. And it impacts Jess, and it's really sad that it does. But you're right. He could have been worse, but also she should have sent him to Luke earlier.
Yes, I agree.
It's interesting to see the characters who didn't have a strong mother figure in their life and how they turned out. Paris being another good example.
Yeah.
And how emotionally disconnected she is. Anytime she's interacting with her mother that we see or hear even is criticism. So it sounds like her parents travel a lot. They're not really around to attend to her needs. She's being raised by her nanny, who I guess could also fall under that surrogate motherhood category. And it impacts her ability to connect to people. I think people underestimate the impact that their modeling of healthy emotional relationships has on their children. And I think you see that clearly in Paris.
What do you think about how we see stay-at-home moms portrayed on the show versus the working mom? Do you think there's a benefit to one or the other? And who do you think does either one, if not both, well on the show?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I'm tempted to say that working motherhood is portrayed better than stay-at-home motherhood. Like, I think they're actually trying to make a point that, you know, stay-at-home wives or mothers are somehow lesser than their working counterparts. I think we see that most clearly with Emily.
Yep.
Where she goes 35 years as from what we see in the show, at least, before she maybe really starts to question her role and how that gendered expectation was put on her. We start to see it when she goes shopping. I think, like, Scene in a Mall might be the first instance where we really see it come up, where Jason entering Richard's business life has sort of made her question her role in his life, because he's starting to rethink how business is done. So, like, the elegant cocktail party is no longer the way it's done. You know, you have to be modern and memorable to make it in business, as opposed to conventional or traditional. And it starts to shake her sense of identity. And then you see it explicitly when, I think it's Rory's 21st birthday, ironically enough, when Richard says, you know, she has more to do, more to be. She's joining the DAR. She's planning frivolous parties. I want more for her than that. She's destined for more. And Emily's like, you don't want her to have my life, which shows that the attitudes of a lot of the characters, and therefore probably the writers, might be that the life of a woman who is devoted entirely to her husband and her children might be missing something.
But I also think there is something to be said for being a present and stay-at-home mother too. Like, combining it, like, with, you know, getting out into the world and having a career path is good, but we see moments where Emily is remorseful that she missed out on a lot of mothering, if not almost all of it, with Lorelai. And I think back to, like, the moment when she finds out that, you know, at one point she had a broken leg, and, you know, when she throws her back out, and Emily is just almost over the moon to be able to be there for her daughter and mother her in a way that she really hadn't been able to do since she was a small child. And I feel bad for Emily, even though it was kind of her fault, because no one told you that you couldn't mother Lorelai, or that, you know, you passed along that responsibility to seemingly a nanny when you didn't have to. But I can still feel remorse for her for what she's noticing that she missed out on.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the point of identity, like motherhood as an identity in the show. I think part of the reason that she feels so much remorse is the fact that when Lorelai left, not only was she, like, losing her daughter in terms of physical presence, and her granddaughter also leaving the home at the same time, but that challenged Emily's self-concept, because she was a wife and a mother, and so now she was just a wife with her daughter gone. And it shook her identity to the core, because that's what she was raised for and expected to be doing. And so even though Lorelai was already about 17 and was probably going to be leaving home relatively soon anyway, the whole situation just caused this rift between them that caused that mother-daughter relationship to fracture even worse than it had been, because Emily was unable to accept Lorelai for who she was. And so it just created this schism that fuels the show, really, because their estrangement and coming back together is a huge part of their arcs throughout the entire thing. It just underpins the entire emotional resonance of of these characters, right? So I think motherhood as an identity is certainly something that the show explores quite a bit. And also, not just that, but also maintaining an identity outside of motherhood. And what mothers do when their children are no longer there. Lorelai has to contend with it when she thinks about Rory going off to college.
Do you think that the absency of motherhood, though, and specifically with Emily being so absent in Lorelai's life, is kind of what allowed or led to the codependency that we see between Lorelai and Rory?
I think indirectly, yeah. I don't think Lorelai recognizes that she was doing it necessarily in that way. I think she was just trying to foster a situation where her daughter could actually talk to her and come to her in a way that she never could go to her mother. But it went too far, and she didn't recognize that there needs to be boundaries and some separation between any two people, even like between a pair of spouses. There needs to be individuality and separation in order for each person to remain like self-identified basically, and to maintain that psychological separation. And Rory was just way too connected to her mom. In some situations, it's great, and it fosters a strong relationship and bond between them that allows her to go to things with, allows her to go to her mother with things. Man, these Rorys, I tell you.
Yeah. You poured well.
I did. I totally eyeballed this and nailed it. So put it that way. But it allows Rory to go to her mother with things that a lot of people couldn't go to their mothers for. And I think that works to both of their benefits quite a bit. Sometimes it doesn't, and it gets a little too crossing that line. But I think it's good when a mother and daughter can have that kind of open communication that they were able to achieve because of that philosophy. But yeah, Rory is codependent because she spent so much of her childhood just with her mother. She didn't have as many stable parental figures, I suppose, as some people, like that nuclear family of two parents might have been beneficial to her. I think one thing the show doesn't do very well is address fully the impact on Rory that Christopher not being around so much had on her. Like really fully plumbing those depths. Because there's a lot of research to show that kids who grow up without their father are, raised in less stable households and have worse outcomes emotionally, socially, and psychologically than those who grow up with two parents. But then two stable, mature parents. Whereas Chris wasn't. So like I don't necessarily fault Lorelai for not thinking Chris could live up to that. But
I agree with that sentiment. And I love that we see Rory in the revival going to Christopher to question, do you feel like, how do you feel that, that you weren't there, that you were an absent father? Do you have any regrets about it? Do you think that you would have wanted to have been there more? And she's asking it at that point because she knows that she's pregnant. And I think she's just really questioning on whether she should tell Logan as the father, because we all think that he is, to what extent should she involve him? Should she go at motherhood alone like Lorelai did? So I love that she's at least recognizing that, like, yes, there is a lot to be said for having a father in a child's life, or at least two stable parents.
Yeah. I really hope that she takes her own childhood to heart in making the decision of whether or not to include Logan, because I hope she realizes that the lack of Christopher in her life had a profound effect, and that similarly deciding to go it alone with her own daughter could have further reaching effects than anticipated.
Yeah, that's not a generational trauma, perhaps, that you would want to necessarily pass on and keep perpetuating, because then who knows? Like, let's say, Rory's daughter gets pregnant and has seen her grandmother and her own mother go it alone, and she thinks, like, that's just how it's always been in my family, so I don't need a second person there. And again, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can be a successful single parent, but it's not an idea that I think should always just be routinely perpetuated. So I'm loving that she's trying to like break that cycle and seek that opinion from Christopher.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting moment. And I wonder if Logan would be more like Christopher with Sherry, wherein he's like, I'm doing it right. And I'm leaving Odette. I'm all in on this because this is my child and I love you. And, we're at a place where we can do this together. Whereas Lorelai and Chris really weren't at that place at 16 to make that decision. And I hope that Rory realizes that it is better for the child to have two parents. And, Logan is more stable than Christopher was. So he could probably be a better parental influence at this point in both of their lives. And, I think what you said is also interesting in the fact of someday when Rory's daughter gets pregnant, perpetuating that cycle, that's another thing that tends to happen to girls who grow up without a stable parental, like, father figure. There is a higher risk of teen pregnancy when they grow up without a stable dad.
Yeah.
So, again, with like mother, like daughter, her daughter could grow up to be 16 and have a baby and think it's going to be hunky-dory because grandma did it,
Yeah.
right? So that idea of single motherhood is preferable to, I mean, in a lot of ways it is preferable to being in a bad marriage. Like, you don't want to necessarily
Yeah,
be in a
agreed.
marriage just for the sake of a child. But, you know, I think it underlines the importance maybe of not just being stable in your own life and deciding to go it alone, but also maybe being at a point where you do have a partner, or at least like a robust safety net to help out, because
Mm-hmm.
it can go seriously sideways if you don't. And it does in some ways.
Yeah.
In the show, it demonstrates that, or actually I think it almost glorifies single motherhood in a way, and it makes it look easier than it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the last 15 years or so, maybe, I think we've seen maybe an increase in media that perpetuates the idea that women can absolutely have it all and go it alone. There are even movies like The Backup Plan,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's another one. It's got Jennifer Aniston and what's his name? I can't remember. But like, the idea of women getting inseminated to have children on their own without a husband, and shenanigans ensue, obviously, because it's a rom-com.
Yeah.
But so, like, seeing an increase in media like that is, again, glorifying the idea of single motherhood, and I think maybe Lorelai has a bit of an influence on that.
Mm-hmm. You just made me think of another really spectacular movie that kind of touches on some of what you just said, where sometimes going alone with parenthood is good, sometimes it's bad. Juno.
Right. That's an excellent movie.
Wonderful film. Highly recommended if you've never seen it. But the premise of it is that there's a mother and a father who are unable to have a child of their own, are seeking to adopt. They come across a teenage girl who is pregnant, looking to give up the child because she's a teenager and recognizing that she is not ready or fit to be a mother, cannot financially do so, gives the child, or is planning on giving this child up to these parents after it's born. And the father figure in this movie is just a garbage human being who doesn't want to be a father, but is just very seemingly incapable of doing so and should not be one. And the movie shows that at the end of the day, the woman ends up still taking responsibility for this and adopting this child, but goes it alone.
Yeah. And okay, I remember the name of the movie. It's The Switch.
Okay.
And it's Jason Bateman, who I believe is also in Juno.
Yes. Yes.
So, yeah, worlds colliding with that one. Yeah, then The Switch, she wants to have a baby and has sperm from a bank, and her like best friend who's in love with her switches the samples so that it's his kid.
Wow.
No ethical problems with that whatsoever. Anyways,
wow.
But yeah, you make a great point with Juno, where they just, and it's so great. Like, it looks like it turns out beautifully, but it ends with Jennifer Garner and a baby. And it doesn't show you any of the struggles that she goes through after that, trying to do this alone.
Yeah, it just makes it seem like it's going to be very idyllic for her. And maybe it will be, because she is shown to have a very good job. She has money saved that she has earned on her own without her husband, who is just not even in the picture anymore when she takes responsibility for this child. But it does make it seem like it's going to be very idyllic and perfect for her going forward. And that's not a good idealization to pass on to anybody in any situation. I don't love that Gilmore Girls idealizes it in that way. I don't love that Juno idealized it in that way. There needs to be a little bit more of like rawness to portraying how motherhood actually is.
That's true. And that leads me to another interesting point that I sort of made a connection to fairly recently. With the rise of momfluencers on Instagram and on YouTube, and people making content out of their kids, it's interesting, because I wonder if Lorelai had any influence on it. You know, if this sort of like early 2000s idea of these modern portrayals of motherhood may have impacted the way that we portray our own families and try to make them look glossier than they are, trying to make motherhood seem beautiful and easy and make it look Instagram perfect.
Probably. I would say absolutely yes. I mean, you know, kids are adorable and fun and sweet, but they can also be absolute terrors at times.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's good that what we see from, you know, those mom influencers on social media platforms are just always making their kids seem perfect, and that motherhood is just full of rainbows and sunshine, and it's not truthful. I would almost rather see mom influencers who are just like having a breakdown because their kid is just bouncing off the walls and they just are like they can't handle it in that moment. Like, show me something like that. Like, you know, it just, there needs to be more truth and more, you know, just ground to stand on, to like just recognize that, like, yes, this is actually a really hard thing, and like moms should always be celebrated for that reason.
Yeah, I like the word you used earlier, rawness. Motherhood is disgusting.
Yes.
Sometimes. And like nobody talks about it. It's like the dirty secret nobody wants to mention.
Mhm.
And so people think that making their lives look good online will make it feel good and will bring them some sort of benefit. But it's so much harder than it's portrayed in fictionalized narratives and even by a lot of momfluencers. There are some who do a great job and they really don't gloss over it and they tell you the real stories, and that's helpful. That is informative. That helps people like me who are, you know, early 30s, no kids, decide if I actually want them, you
Mhm.
know? And that's important. We need the truth
Yep.
from our depictions of motherhood. And while Gilmore Girls handles it with quite a bit of nuance in a way that maybe like, you know, Donna Reed and June Cleaver and all of those kinds of characters maybe didn't handle it with. So in that way, Gilmore is a step up from a lot of other portrayals of motherhood,
Mhm.
but it still doesn't quite hit that level of, you know, truthfulness in life.
Yeah, it still paints it in too pretty of a picture.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, it's a little too Instagrammable.
Mhm.
Their life just seems so Instagrammable to me. Cottage core house and cute little town, perfect coffees.
You know, quaint little inn.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
adorable as heck kitchen.
Yeah. They're hashtag goals.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, makes it look way too easy.
Yeah. Do you think there are any mothers on the show though that were portrayed accurately, like in terms of like really seeing the struggle?
I mean, you see a little bit of it with Lane
Mm-hmm.
because there's some of the only like newborns that we actually get to interact with on the
Mhm.
show. Even after Sherry has Gigi, we don't see her again until she's about 2.
Yeah.
And Christopher is alone with her and has no idea how to change a diaper. So there's that.
Yep.
And you know, just I've changed one baby and now there's a weird smell emanating from the other
Mm-hmm.
kind of dynamic that feels truthful.
Yep.
And the fact that Mrs. Kim is so involved in that, having that sort of like extra set of hands, especially because she has twins, that feels very true to life.
Mm-hmm.
And another person who actually feels like maybe could be a little more accurate might be Anna.
Okay, tell me why.
Again, we don't really see her when April is young, but we can see that she's sort of like holding it together in a similar way to Lorelai, but she's made out to be less shiny, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
She's so similar to Lorelai. She's got that whole like eccentric ADHD thing going on. Like the house is a mess and like she's like, hold on, I gotta, you know, I have a tea emergency, or no, it's a pillow emergency.
Yep.
It's a pillow emergency. Yeah. So just that sort of like slight element of chaos is there, which feels like motherhood. And entrepreneurship at the same time.
Yep.
So there's that. And, you know, just her fierce protectiveness and loyalty to her daughter. That to me feels, you know, true to life.
Yep. Also say Suki a little bit. She's like, she and Jackson are very like eclectic and offbeat parents, but they're also really good at nurturing their children to like be independent and do things for themselves. And I think that's a good goal. And I think that's an accurate portrayal of motherhood too, where you want your child to start being autonomous when they can be and do things for themselves. And there are moments when she's like, I don't even want to get up to like change the channel. Like just figure out how to do it yourself.
Davey, turn the volume down.
Yeah.
You heard me. Yeah. That has a degree of verisimilitude rarely achieved in other TV shows, I think.
Yeah.
Everything else is a little too like perfect or dramatized or whatever. That felt real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll give props to Gilmore Girls for nuancing it more truthfully in that way, where again, like I think you highlighted two really good examples, Damn Donna Reed, but especially June Cleaver, and the way that family model was portrayed is just too perfect and just so far from the truth that I get that at the time that show was coming out, like that's the ideal American household and the ideal like traditional model family, but it's just so false. So I like that we do see instances in Gilmore Girls where you can just bring a little bit more of the reality to it of what motherhood actually entails.
Yeah, that's entirely true.
Yeah.
All right, I'll ask you this. How do you feel about the mom code? Like what does the mom code mean to you, and how does it show up on the show?
I'll say first and foremost that the mom code doesn't always have to apply to just your biological child. I feel like it is acceptable and warranted pulling it out for any child who you see is just in need of that card being shown. And I think of Lorelai pulling Madeline and Louise out of the party in New York City when they just completely took off from the Bengals concert, and she had to go get them because they took off with, their two 16-year-old girls taking off to go to a party with, adult men where who knows what could happen. So I love that moment from her. I think the mom code is just recognizing that at the moment your child and or children, or even like just an adolescent in general, is in need of correction and or guidance that they're not able to like formulate or just come up with on their own. So they need that adult, and in this case, like just a mother figure to perpetuate for them and pull them out of that situation that they're in.
Yeah, and I'm going to take that a step further and say the other side of the mom code is also respecting other mothers' boundaries.
Yes.
And I think she does that exceptionally well with Mrs. Kim and Lane.
Mm-hmm.
So it's recognizing that your way of mothering is not the only way of mothering, and that there can be common ground found even if you don't agree with someone else's tactics necessarily, because each kid is different and you have to treat each thing with its own facts in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And Lorelai's really good at doing that. And I've mentioned it before, but I will continue to reference it because it's one of the best scenes, I think, from season 1 at the end of Double Date, when she goes to Mrs. Kim and says, "You have such a great kid, and I just don't want you to draw lines in the sand that you can't cross later.
Yeah.
You have to learn to trust your kid. And like, I'm going to do what I can to respect your rules. And, you've done a great job, but maybe sometimes taking perspective from another mother might be helpful as well. And just remembering that like your way is not the only way, and respecting that."
Yeah, that was a great scene in how it was written, but just in how Lorelai approached it with Mrs. Kim, because it's so easy to cross a boundary there between mothers where you're essentially telling another mother how to parent. And Lorelai didn't do that. She was just offering suggestions without saying like, this is what you need to or should be doing. And it's good that I love when she's just like, listen, Lane's a great kid and you have done a really wonderful job, but maybe just consider this other perspective too.
Yeah, because I have life experience that you may not think of that gives me a perspective that could be helpful to you here.
Yeah.
I was not treated with as much respect as I deserved. I wasn't trusted. I was smothered. And I don't want to see that for Lane because, you could lose that relationship if you're not careful, because the rebellion will go too far. And it almost does.
Yeah.
There was quite a break between them in season 4. And I think Mrs. Kim took that to heart. She did loosen up a little bit after that. She sort of clawed back on the grounding a little bit. And by season 5, we see that she's really adapted to the idea that her daughter is not exactly what she expected, but that she's still a great person that she wants to maintain a relationship with. And if that takes, clawing back on the bottom line a little and accepting what Lane wants for her life, then she's going to do it because the relationship between mother-daughter is more important to her than her ending up with a Korean doctor.
Mm-hmm. But on the other side of that coin, I'll ask you this. Do you think that not momming or being as disciplinary or strict with your kids is also bad?
I think it's bad. Yeah.
And how do we see that negatively play out on the show where maybe Lorelai and or anyone else should have mommed a bit more than they did, and there were repercussions from not having done so?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation that sort of goes a little bit broader because, you know, you can't be like Mrs. Kim or Emily most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they had their moments of like good ideas and appropriate boundaries, but then there are other times when the boundaries overstepped a little into the autonomy of the child and the identity of the child, and that's where they disconnected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when Lorelai went the opposite direction and was maybe too easy on Rory and was so concerned with being her friend instead of being her mom, I think there were maybe some boundaries that weren't drawn that should have been.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need both. You need structure and security and provision of functional needs, as we were talking about a few episodes ago, but you also need to let your kid be themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you have to strike that balance, and Lorelai didn't always do that. I think sometimes she went too far in the other direction. So you need to sort of scale it back to where there is discipline and there are consequences and there are set rules beyond just, you know, curfews at 11, see ya.
Yeah.
And I don't think she maybe put enough of those in place with Rory because she just sort of ran wild a little bit of times. She wasn't a wild person where Lorelai really had to worry about her going out and getting drunk and doing drugs and
Mm-hmm.
and having unprotected sex or stuff like that. And I think that sort of lulled Lorelai into a false sense of security that her daughter would just be okay because she wasn't doing these wild things like she did.
Yeah.
Without recognizing a broader impact that it could have on her attitudes toward other people and life and relationships. So I think, yeah, discipline and structure and direct guidance are important from a mother. You can't just be like, they're a good kid, they'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
You need to actually provide positive, affirmative, like action
Mm-hmm.
and guidance on those kinds of issues, because otherwise your kids are just sort of like left to figure it out for themselves and they don't know what's up. They don't know how to handle it. Without that kind of direction, they're going to alienate themselves from people.
Mm-hmm. Fun little side question. What do you hope for and want to see from Rory as a mother if we ever get it?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I really want to see her take the best of all the worlds because she's seen what it's like to live like Lorelai did now.
Mm-hmm.
She got that from her grandparents when she lived with them. And she knows that's not the way to do it. And she knows how she grew up. I think that's what I want to see. I don't know that we will see it
Mm-hmm.
because I think she's going to lean more into the Lorelai parenting style and will be very much like that with her kid. So I don't know if we'll get enough of the structure that the kid needs. I hope we do. But then again, she's in her 30s. Maybe she has some other experience, or maybe Lane or Paris will even chime in, or even Suki could chime in and be like, okay, I don't want to tell you what to do here, but okay, you're being way too permissive with this kid because they're going a little wild now.
Yeah. I would love to see moments like that. And that's why I think it's good for just anyone who is like a mother figure, you got to have that support system and that network in place, whether it's sisters, friends, family members, other people in town to course correct you when perhaps like you're not parenting or mothering in the way that you should. So yeah, if we, again, Amy, give us that revival, but fill it with moments of Rory's friends and the people that she loves in life stepping in to like help her raise this kid. That would be so wonderful to see.
I was just going to say, it'd be like, you know, Gilmore Girls, The Next Generation.
Mm-hmm.
GGTNG, give it to me. Please, please, I need it.
We're going to like beg for this every single episode that we do. Yes.
As my birthday present,
there it is.
I hereby formally request. It's not that hard. Please So yeah, I would absolutely love to see the next generation of Gilmore moms
Mhm.
raising their kids. We're 6 years out, almost 7 now. I guess closer to 6. 6 years out from the revival. So Rory would have a 5-year-old. Paris would have like 8 or 9-year-olds. Lane's kids would be early teens. And so there would be all these different levels of like moments of motherhood that are very different from each other that could inform each other beautifully.
Yeah. I also want to see Emily as a great grandmother.
Yeah.
Like, bring back Kelly Bishop and just give me all of that. Like, because she made mistakes with Lorelai. She even made mistakes with Rory. I don't know if she would. I don't know. Maybe she's in her, old age now, because Kelly Bishop is not old. She looks wonderful.
Ageless.
Timeless.
Cheers to Kelly Bishop.
Yes. Who is a gem. Would she make the same mistakes with her great-granddaughter? I would love to see that interaction too, because there is a lot to be said, not just for mothers, but for grandmothers.
Exactly. We get to see her as a grandmother, but also, like I said, a parent to Rory. Because they stepped in and tried to fill that role for a 20-year-old girl. But I think her dynamic with a great-grandchild would be way different, especially now with Richard gone and her living a more laid-back lifestyle on Nantucket. She's found a new sense of purpose, and she's got Berta's family with her. I think she's really relaxed a lot and is starting to come into her own in a way that she wasn't when she was tied to Richard so much and trying to be so prim and proper all the time. She's really given that up. And I would hope that that would lead to some sort of loosening in her expectations socially for her own great-granddaughter. Maybe she is starting to recognize that the world has changed so much and that the expectations for women no longer fit that mold. And just being sort of a doting, loving great-grandmother to this baby in a way that she wasn't even to Rory, especially because Lorelai ran away with Rory and sort of robbed Emily of that loving, grandmotherly, doting relationship.
Yeah, I would love to see Emily, like, and it's societal expectations, but it's expectations that just Emily put on her daughter and her granddaughter herself to, marry the father of your child, or at least try and be with them, perform societal expectations, for your husband in terms of like household responsibilities or everything like that. She imposed those implications on Lorelai and Rory even at moments. I would love to see like just a total switch from Emily, where she's just raising her granddaughter to be just this badass, like boss ass bitch, independent woman. I can't talk anymore.
Yeah, I know. We've been talking a lot lately, and so we're just reaching our limit. But we're almost done with this episode. So I think we should close out with this question.
Okay.
What do you think are some of the best qualities in a mother, and how are they portrayed on the show? Like, can you come up with any good examples of like moments where some of the best like qualities are on display?
I would say patience. Kids are going to test you a lot of the time. Lorelai, I think, was always really good at that. In the sense that when Rory fucked up, and she did often enough, Lorelai, for the most part, was always patient with her in terms of, let me not jump the gun and overreact and try and figure out what is going on here. Let me talk to my daughter instead of biting her head off. She doesn't always, win at that. Like when Rory stays out all night with Dean, she jumps down Rory's throat and just berates her for, doing that, thinking that Rory's going to make the same mistake. But then she has other moments where she even gets into like legal hot water, but she's composed enough and patient enough to scale herself back and really just have a conversation with her daughter, not excusing bad behavior and not failing to discipline, but just having the patience to know that sometimes approaching it in that way is just going to allow for better success with your child in terms of how they're going to respond to whatever situation they got themselves into.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Patience is absolutely critical. Like, I'm just thinking of the newborn stage myself, where it's like you need to have
Mhm.
Herculean patience
Mhm.
just to deal with screaming babies. Nonetheless, those more complicated issues later in life for them, right?
Yep.
I guess one that I would throw in would be like trustworthiness.
Mm.
Kids should be able to trust their parents,
Yes.
that they're not going to betray them, that they'll, I guess part of that is also like loyalty and communication go hand in hand with it.
Mhm.
Or like they can trust that when they come to you, you're not going to fly off the handle
Mhm.
and, you know, treat them unfairly. And also not even just, again, with your direct kids, but with other people around you.
Absolutely.
Again, Lorelai does well with this one because Rory really can trust Lorelai. She can go to her with just about anything, as can some of Rory's friends.
Mhm.
Lane and Paris both being excellent examples.
Dean does it too, though.
Dean, they all trust Lorelai. And, you know, she does well to make herself someone that people can talk to and that she's not going to immediately jump the gun
Mhm.
and be judgmental or punitive, overly punitive.
Yeah.
So I think that's a key one.
Mhm. Would you say that that's your biggest takeaway as to how to? There's never going to be a perfect mother, but you can try and be a very, very good one.
I think that's a big component of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, you'll never be a perfect mother. No mother is ever flawless.
Mhm.
Not within the show, not within real life. So,
Yeah.
but I think being someone that people can trust is good for life in general, not just motherhood, but like
Mhm.
marriage, relationships, friendships,
Yep.
even employment. You need to be someone that people can count on. I guess something that goes along with that too is security, being someone who can provide stability and consistency
Mhm.
to kids because they really, really need that.
Yeah. It's sad for all of the examples of kids on the show that we didn't see get that. But at least, and it doesn't always work out that way. Like Paris and Jess still grew up to be pretty well adjusted individuals despite having that lack of stability. It's not always like that in real life. There are a lot of kids who just continue to struggle into adulthood, and it just stems from the lack of stability that they had in their childhood. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Like kids need that ground to stand on, and it starts with just having just a really, really good mom.
Yeah. There's a few more like good mothering qualities that I want to highlight. And like, I don't know if a list like this would ever be exhaustive, right? Like
No.
we could prattle on about this forever because there are so many like interesting facets to it that we could explore. But, you know, I think they should be nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, again, something that Lorelai did well. She was able to nurture a love of reading and curiosity and
Mm-hmm.
Ambition in Roy. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Ambition. So that's a key.
Mm-hmm.
Resourcefulness. Lorelai was incredibly resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
Then again, she had a bit of a safety net to fall back on that most people don't have, both from Emily and from Mia.
Mm-hmm.
I think she had a lot of privilege that went unacknowledged. She kind of claims to have done it all on her own and forgotten exactly how much other people did for her in those early years, even taking a chance and employing her in the first place.
Yep. I'd say like open-mindedness to understand that your child might not follow the path that you want them to take in life. They might choose a career path that is not what you foresee for them, not what you want for them. An educational path, like on the whole, provided that, you know, your child isn't physically or emotionally or just in any sort of way harming another human being, you've got to let them be who they are. And that stems from just initially going in, just saying, I'm going to be open-minded to raising my child in the best way that I see fit, but encouraging their own individuality as well.
Yeah. And last but not least, I mean, again, like I said, this list is not exhaustive. There are so many more, but I think these are really good examples that we actually see in the show. But the last one that I have to throw out there is love. You have to be loving.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to love them unconditionally.
Yes.
Because that's going to give them a lot of confidence. to move forward in life.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that you're always going to be there for them and that your love isn't dependent on them fitting into some mold that you expect them to.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Emily kind of failed and Lorelai succeeded.
Yeah.
I know we've talked in the past about like whether Lorelai was a good mom, and when you look at her through that lens of these qualities that we were just talking about, she succeeds on a lot of fronts.
Mm-hmm. That's going to be something equally interesting to explore in a couple weeks when we get to our Emily and Richard character study, all the ways that they succeeded and failed as parents. But
Yeah.
I agree that just at the end of the day, loving your child unconditionally is the most important thing that you can do.
Yeah. Emphasis on the word unconditionally. Like if there's all kinds of strings attached, like Emily puts on, then it's not really the type of motherly love that that helps kids flourish to their greatest potential. So,
wow. Well, I think that might be a good place to call this one. We're going to have so much more to say on like just the concept of motherhood in general, because that's the crux of this show. So we've barely scratched the surface with what, we can talk about and what we see on the show with it. But I think that's a good place to end here.
I agree.
Yeah. What have we got coming up next?
Oh, I'm so excited for the next one. We're talking about all of the proposals on the show. I'm a big sucker for weddings. So I'm really excited to get to the proposals, and we'll talk about weddings separately at a later date. But for now, we're gonna rank all of the proposals.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna do it, best or worst to best. But come back for that, because our list and our ideas on who did it best, who did it worst might not be yours. So we'd love to engage with you and just see what you have to think. That'll be next week. So come join us for dinner for that. Yeah. But in the meantime, go back and watch some of our old videos if you want more GG content. Follow us on social media so you can stay up to date on what we have going on there. All links to that are in the description below. And just do the YouTube things as always. Like and subscribe to our channel. Helps us out a lot. And we're like always uber grateful for it.
Stop making that sound.
Yeah. Oh, Kirk. But anyhow, join us next week for Friday night dinner. And we'll see you then. Also, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.